For the next few minutes, don't judge the thoughts that appear. Just notice them. Sometimes the people who occupy our minds are only pointing us towards something we've been avoiding within ourselves. Let's begin. There are people who occupy space in your mind that they never earned the rent for. Not because they're inherently important, because something about them is still unfinished. A conversation that never resolved, an admiration that never got acted on, a resentment that never got released. Jung's warning was simple. The mind doesn't let go of what it hasn't finished processing, no matter how long ago the actual event ended. This is worth taking seriously precisely because it feels so personal from the inside, as if the specific person genuinely matters that much. Often, they're simply the last address the mind had on file for something much older than the relationship itself. Tonight, why certain people take up permanent residence in your thoughts and what they're actually pointing at. Observation 1. The people you can't stop envying are showing you a version of yourself you've abandoned. Envy rarely attaches to something you have no relationship with at all. Nobody envies a stranger's skill in a field they've never once considered. Envy attaches specifically to the life you once imagined for yourself, or still quietly do and have stopped actively pursuing. This is why envy toward the same category of person tends to repeat across years. The freelance life, the confident public voice, the financial risks somebody else took. It isn't really about them. It's a recurring signal from a version of yourself you keep setting aside, showing up dressed as resentment, because resentment is easier to sit with than admitting the want out loud. Notice how specific envy tends to be. It rarely spreads evenly across every kind of success. It clusters tightly around one or two particular shapes of life, repeated across different people over the years, which is itself the clue. A general capacity for envy would target anything impressive. A recurring, narrow pattern is targeting something much more personal that keeps resurfacing under a new name each time. Observation 2. The people you can't forgive are still doing work in your head because the conversation never actually finished. Most unresolved conflict isn't unresolved because the facts are still unclear. It's unresolved because something that needed to be said out loud never got said, and the mind keeps replaying the scene, searching for the ending it never got to have. This is why the imagined argument, the one rehearsed in the shower, revised for the 10th time on a walk, delivered perfectly to someone who isn't even in the room, never actually satisfies anything. It isn't trying to win an argument. It's trying to complete a scene that got interrupted before it reached its natural close, and no amount of rehearsal finishes a scene the other person was never present for. This is also why the rehearsal keeps returning even after the anger itself has faded. It isn't anger driving the loop by that point. It's an incomplete narrative arc, and the mind treats incompleteness the way it treats an unresolved chord in music, quietly uncomfortable until it resolves, whether or not resolution is ever actually possible with the real person involved. This is why journaling the unsent version of the conversation sometimes helps. More than rehearsing it silently does. Writing it down forces the scene toward an actual ending on the page, instead of leaving it circling indefinitely in the same unfinished loop it started in. Observation 3. Fixation is the mind's way of flagging unfinished business. But the business usually isn't actually with the person doing the occupying. This is the part that's easy to miss. The specific face that keeps appearing in your thoughts is rarely the actual subject of what's unresolved. More often, that person simply happened to be present at the moment something real got triggered. An old fear of being replaceable. An old wound about being overlooked. A long-standing question about whether you're actually good enough. The person becomes the address the mind keeps mailing the thought to, purely because they were there when the feeling first got stirred. Remove them entirely. and the underlying question would still be sitting there, unanswered, simply looking for its next address. This explains something strange that almost everyone has experienced at least once: fixating intensely on a person, resolving the situation somehow, and then finding the exact same fixation reattaching to someone completely unrelated within a matter of months. If the fixation had genuinely been about the first person, resolving things with them should have ended it. Instead, the underlying question simply found a new place to live. Proof, in hindsight, that the address was never really the point. Observation 4. The intensity of a fixation is proportional to how much of your own sense of worth got quietly outsourced to that person's opinion of you. A passing acquaintance's disapproval barely registers, because nothing important was ever staked on their view of you. A specific person's disapproval can occupy months of thought, because somewhere along the way, their verdict became a stand-in for your own. This is why the people we fixate on most are so rarely the people who matter most by any objective measure. They're the people whose opinion got assigned an authority over your self-worth that they were never actually qualified to hold, and never asked to hold in the first place. It's worth asking, plainly, how that authority got assigned in the first place, because it rarely happens through a conscious decision. More often, it happens the same way any habit forms: repeated small moments where their reaction was treated as more informative than your own judgment, until the pattern calcified into something that felt permanent, even though it was built the same way any other habit was, one repetition at a time. Revoking that authority doesn't require a dramatic confrontation either. It usually just requires noticing, plainly, that it was granted rather than earned, which is often enough on its own to loosen a grip that felt, until that moment, like it had always simply been there. Observation 5. The way out was never confrontation with the actual person. It was completing the loop internally. Without them, most people wait for a real conversation to provide the closure a situation never got. The apology, the explanation, the acknowledgement. That conversation frequently never comes, and waiting for it hands the other person permanent control over when the thinking stops. The loop closes the moment you answer, for yourself, the actual question the fixation was standing in for, whether that's admitting the want you'd abandoned or deciding your own worth was never actually theirs to determine in the first place. This is slower and less satisfying than a real confrontation would feel, and it's also the only version of closure that doesn't depend on someone else's cooperation. Waiting for them to provide it means the loop stays open indefinitely, on their schedule. Closing it yourself means it can end on a random Tuesday, for no external reason at all, simply because the actual question finally got answered. None of this means the people you think about constantly did nothing wrong, or that every fixation is secretly your own fault. Real harm is real harm. It means the thinking itself, the part that won't stop long after the situation ended, was never actually about them continuing to matter. It was about something in you still waiting to be finished. So the next person who shows up uninvited in your thoughts tonight, before deciding what you'd say to them, ask what they're actually standing in for. The answer won't always arrive immediately, and that's fine. Just asking the question honestly tends to loosen the fixation's grip slightly, even before the full answer is clear. That's usually where the thinking finally stops.